Okay, what am I babbling on about today? What am I talking about today? I'm talking about Thin Lizzy, but I'm not just talking about Thin Lizzy, my favorite band of all time. I'm talking about all the great guitar players that have come through Thin Lizzy and the mark those guitar players left on the band. Um, for the first three albums, Thin Lizzy was a three-piece. Phil Lynott on bass and vocals, Brian Downey on drums, and the guitar player was Eric Bell. Um, Great guitar player, nice tone, juicy, fat guitar tone. Um, those first three Thin Lizzy albums were different than the Thin Lizzy that became known for that twin guitar hard rock sound. They had a bit more Celtic influence, some folk, some rock. Standout tracks from that time, of course. Um, a traditional Irish number called Whiskey in the Jar, which they recorded, and it became almost synonymous with Thin Lizzy. The Rocker, kick-ass song. Um, Babyface, Ray Gun, Brought Down, Honesty is No Excuse, Look What the Wind Blew In. Um, just a lot of great songs, but Eric Bell had a different background. I think he was frustrated, didn't want to play what Thin Lizzy was playing. One day he threw his guitar down on the stage. That was it. He never played as a member of the band again. In 1974 came the album Nightlife, and for that album, Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson joined the band, and those two, along with Phil and Brian Downey on drums, became what would be known as the classic lineup of Thin Lizzy. Nightlife was a transitional album. They were working on that twin guitar sound. Didn't quite gel on that album, but there were some good tracks. Showdown, It's Only Money, She Knows, which was a super good song, and of course the ballad Still in Love with You, which would be showcased very nicely on Thin Lizzy's Live and Dangerous album. Live and Dangerous, one of my favorite albums, alongside Bob Seger's Live Bullet. Anyway, the next album, Fighting, speaking of Bob Seger, they covered a Bob Seger song called Rosalie, which became really just a signature Thin Lizzy song. The title track Fighting was on that album. A song called Suicide, which became a concert staple. Wild One was on there. Freedom Song. King's Vengeance. That twin guitar sound was really starting to gel on Fighting. By the time they did their next album, Jailbreak, not only did that album shoot them to superstardom with, The Boys Are Back in Town, but it became known by a lot of Thin Lizzy fans as the epitome of Thin Lizzy. The title track, Jailbreak, awesome. I mentioned The Boys Are Back in Town, Cowboy Song, Emerald. Those songs were on there. A song called Warrior was on there. The deep cuts were great. My favorite Thin Lizzy of all time just barely nudges out the next album, Johnny the Fox, which featured a song called Johnny, a song called Rocky, Fool's Gold, Borderline, Massacre, Don't Believe a Word. Those became concert staples, Massacre and Don't Believe a Word. Just, I almost love that album as much as I love Jailbreak. By the time they did the Bad Reputation album, Brian Robertson, look, Thin Lizzy was known for fighting, partying up with women, playing rock and roll, but Brian Robertson was wild even by Thin Lizzy standards. He ended up breaking his hand in a fight, had a temper, the band had to move on without him. That Bad Reputation album, Scott Gorham did most of the guitar work on his own. Of course, off that album came Dancing in the Moonlight, a song called Southbound, Killer Without a Cause, A lot of great stuff. Um, the next album, Black Rose, Midge Ure did some guitar work. Gary Moore came in to help. Gary Moore, of course, um, a legendary guitarist on his own. Uh, Him and Phil were friends, you know. He'd come in. He had an on-again, off-again relationship with Thin Lizzy. He uh, would come in, do some work for Thin Lizzy. Him and Phil would fight. He'd leave. Phil would do some work on Gary's solo stuff. They'd fight. You know, that's how it went. But Gary Moore, I think, joined the band around that time and toured with him for a little while, as long as him and Phil could get along. And some songs off that album, Black Rose, of course, uh, Waiting for an Alibi, which became a concert staple. Sarah, the second song he'd written called Sarah. The first was back in the Eric Bell days, written for his grandmother. This one was same title, different song, written for his daughter, Sarah. Was on that album. Uh, um, I said Waiting for an Alibi. You know, I know I'm missing some stuff. Slipping my mind right now, but With Love. I wanted to get that one in there. So, you know, another super album. Gary Moore, as I said, and Midge Ure doing some guitar work there with Scott. Next album, Chinatown in 1980, is the first of two albums to feature a guitar player named Snowy White. Now, Snowy White was a great guitar player, but he did not gel with that Thin Lizzy lifestyle. Didn't fit in the band, so he lasted for two albums. But Chinatown, the title cut on that album, I thought was phenomenal. Having a Good Time, Genocide, The Killing of the Buffalo, We Will Be Strong, Killer on the Loose, a song about Jack the Ripper, Didn't I, a great ballad off that album, Sweetheart, Sugar Blues, the guitar playing on that album, super good. The next album, Renegade, again, awesome title cut. Hollywood Down on Your Luck, No One Told Him, Leave This Town, The Pressure Will Blow, It's Getting Dangerous. A couple of odd tracks that really didn't fit the sound of the album. They're kind of off, but they're great songs. Fats, a very jazzy song about a jazz guy named Fats. The music on there had a lot of jazz sound to it, outside of what the rest of the record sounded like. And Mexican Blood, which told a phenomenal story about a Mexican boy who was always in trouble, being pursued by a sheriff. Great line from the album. Now and then he'd cross the Rio Grande and he'd come back a wanted, hunted man. But that girl was his girl, that pretty Mexican girl. That pretty Mexican girl, she died. The sheriff ended up killing her. But that song has a lot of flamenco sounds to it, and Mexican guitar sounds, and so Fats and Mexican Blood really musically didn't fit, but they were just really super good songs. So that was it, you know, the only two albums that Snowy White played on. A lot of people thought Phil's songwriting was going down at that point, not up to par. You know, certainly his drug use was getting out of control, his health was failing, but I think he wrote great songs for those two albums. Snowy White did his job, and then he was out of the band. The final Thin Lizzy album, of course, Thunder and Lightning. John Sykes, by far the heaviest Thin Lizzy album, because John Sykes, you know, came into the band. He was playing. The title cut, Thunder and Lightning, Cold Sweat, The Sun Goes Down, This Is the One, Bad Habits, Holy War. Just some powerful songs on that album. Of course, the last new studio album, the feature, Phil Lynott on vocals, he died. Last Thin Lizzy studio album, period. New studio album. Um, then there was a live album called Life, of course, which sort of celebrated all these guitar players I've been talking about. At the end of some of the shows, there would be an all-star jam with Scott Gorham, John Sykes, Eric Bell, uh, Gary Moore, and uh, Brian Robertson on guitar, you know, and they'd jam on songs like The Rocker. Uh, Snowy never joined them for those those all-star jams, but there were 3 songs on the album recorded a couple years prior to the album that featured Snowy on guitar: Hollywood, Down on Your Luck, Killer on the Loose, and Renegade. That's a nice live album that documents all these guitar players, these great guitar players. It's not as good as Live and Dangerous by any means, but it's a good live album. A lot of guitar players through Thin Lizzy, they all left their mark on the band without changing it. Of course, you know, Phil passed away, not going to be any new Thin Lizzy stuff. We do have Black Star Riders, formed from the final touring lineup of Thin Lizzy after Phil passed away. That lineup wanted to do a new album. They didn't want to do a new Thin Lizzy album without Phil, so they formed Black Star Riders. It was the amazing Ricky Warwick on vocals and guitar, Scott Gorham on guitar, Damon Johnson on guitar, Marco Mendoza on bass, need I say more, and Jimmy DeGrasso on drums, phenomenal drummer. They formed Black Star Riders, to me an extension of Thin Lizzy. Ricky Warwick, amazing singer, sounds a lot like Phil. The songwriting is very Thin Lizzy oriented, songs that Thin Lizzy, Phil would have been proud to perform. Black Star Riders is a natural extension of Thin Lizzy as far as I'm concerned. Great band, carrying on that classic Thin Lizzy vibe. The lineup now is different than the lineup that started the band, but still they've got 4 studio albums so far, and I hope they keep doing it. They kick ass. Love Ricky Warwick, amazing singer, songwriter. Of course, I love Scott Gorham, the one staple guitarist in Thin Lizzy since 1974. He works so well with all the guitar players that went through Thin Lizzy. But anyway, if you're a Thin Lizzy fan and preaching to the choir, you don't need to hear all this. If you're not, listen to Thin Lizzy. If you've never listened to Thin Lizzy, listen to them. And listen to Black Star Riders. Both great bands. Thin Lizzy, my favorite band ever. Black Star Riders, an extension of Thin Lizzy. One of my new favorite bands. Have been since their first album. Look, hope you enjoyed this video. Click the bell for notifications. Share this video. Subscribe to my channel. Like the video. Leave me a comment, whatever. And come on back. Let's do this again sometime.